The string buzzed, and the 12-year-old's hand froze mid-air. Wait. The session guitarist looked up from the stool, his Stratocaster still humming through the amp. He'd been playing for 18 years, toured with 3 Motown acts, and recorded on more tracks than most people would hear in a lifetime. Wait, what? Michael's fingers hovered above the borrowed acoustic. Play that again. The guitarist frowned. Play what again? The 12th fret. On the G string. The guitarist pressed down on the 12th fret and let it ring. Michael tilted his head, his eyes narrowing like he was looking at something no one else could see. That's not right. What's not right? The guitarist glanced at the tuner clipped to his headstock. It's in tune, kid. I checked it twice before you got here. I know it's in tune. Michael pressed the same fret on the borrowed acoustic, let the note sustain, then pointed at the Stratocaster. But that's sharp. The producer leaned forward from the mixing console. Sharp, same note, same fret. What are you talking about? It's not the same. Michael's voice stayed flat, certain. Your 12th fret is higher than mine. One look, one breath, one decision. The room paused. The guitarist set his pick down on the amp. The assistant engineer glanced at the producer. The tape machine kept spinning, patient and indifferent. This was a teaching session, not a recording date. Michael had asked to learn a riff for a song they were working on, something bluesy with a walking bass line and a 2-bar turnaround. The session guy was doing them a favor, squeezing it in between a Supreme's overdub and a Temptations vocal stack. And now this kid was telling him his guitar was out of tune. Michael. The guitarist's tone softened the way musicians do when they're about to explain something obvious. If it's in tune down here, he played the open G string, then it's in tune up here. He played the 12th fret. That's how guitars work. But here's the part you can't miss. Michael didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just played the 12th fret on the borrowed acoustic, let the note ring, then reached over and plucked the same fret on the session guy's Strat. You hear that? The question hung in the air. The session guitarist paused. He set his pick down on the edge of the amp, where it balanced for a moment before settling flat. He leaned closer, his ear angling toward the sound. He played his 12th fret again, let it sustain for 2 full seconds, then listened as Michael played the acoustic. Same fret, same technique, different result. The producer stood up from his chair and walked over to the live room. His footsteps were soft on the studio carpet, but in the silence they sounded like a countdown. The assistant engineer muted the talkback and pressed one ear to the monitor speaker, cutting out every other frequency in the room, focusing entirely on the 2 guitars. The notes decayed slowly. The overtones shimmered and faded. The 2 guitars rang out, one after the other. Close. Real close. But not identical. The Strat sat just a hair higher, a whisper of sharpness that most ears would skip right past. A difference so small it lived in the margins, in the space between what people hear and what they notice. Most ears would call it close enough. Most ears would move on. Most ears. Not Michael's. The guitarist's jaw tightened. He set the Strat across his knee and stared at the bridge. You're saying my intonation's off. Michael nodded. At the 12th fret, maybe a little higher. How much higher? I don't know the number. Michael's fingers traced the edge of the acoustic sound hole. But it's enough that it doesn't sound like an octave. It sounds like something in between. Silence. Not the kind that comes from waiting. The kind that comes from a professional realizing a 12-year-old just caught something he missed. The kind that sits in the room like a third person. The assistant engineer pulled a strobe tuner from a drawer and handed it to the session guitarist. Let's check. The guitarist clipped it to the headstock. He played the open G string. The tuner's needle sat dead center. Perfect. He frowned slightly, double-checked the tuner's calibration setting, then played the note again. Still perfect. He moved his hand up the neck slowly, almost reluctantly, and pressed down on the 12th fret. The note rang out. The needle drifted right. Not much. Just a few cents sharp. But sharp. The guitarist stared at the needle. He released the string and pressed again, lighter this time, thinking maybe his finger pressure was bending the pitch. The needle drifted right again. Same spot, same amount. He played the harmonic at the 12th fret, a pure octave that doesn't involve fretting pressure. Then he played the fretted note. The fretted note sat higher. The harmonic was true. The fretted octave was lying. The producer crossed his arms. The assistant engineer wrote something on a notepad. The session guitarist stared at the tuner like it had betrayed him. 9 cents, he said quietly. The room exhaled. Michael stayed silent, watching. The guitarist reached into his case and pulled out a small Allen wrench. He adjusted the saddle on the bridge, a tiny quarter turn that shifted the string length by less than a millimeter. He tested the 12th fret again. The needle wavered, then settled. Center. He looked at Michael. Better? Michael played the 12th fret on the acoustic, then reached over and played the Strat. He nodded. Yeah, that's it. 1 second. Don't skip this part. This wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about embarrassing the guitarist. It was about the sound. Michael had been listening to guitars his whole life, on records, in rehearsals, on stage. He'd heard clean intonation, and he'd heard sloppy intonation. He knew what an octave was supposed to feel like. The way the two notes locked together and became one thing instead of two. And when that lock didn't happen, when the frequencies drifted apart by a handful of cents, he heard it. Most people wouldn't. Most musicians wouldn't either. But Michael wasn't most musicians. The session guitarist set the wrench down and played a chord. It rang cleaner now, tighter. He played the riff he'd been teaching. It sat in the pocket differently. He looked at Michael. You've got a good ear, kid. Michael shrugged. I just know what it's supposed to sound like. The producer walked back to the console, moving slower now, more deliberate. He adjusted the mic stand, checked the input level, glanced at Michael, then checked it again. The assistant engineer whispered, How does a 12-year-old hear 9 cents? The producer shook his head. I don't know, but he does. What you saw was only the surface. Underneath the string buzz and the bridge adjustment and the strobe tuner was something most people don't talk about. The difference between hearing music and understanding it. Hearing is passive. Understanding is active. It's knowing that the 12th fret should be exactly half the string length of the open note. It's knowing that if the intonation is off, the octave won't align. It's knowing what aligned sounds like, and what it doesn't. The session ran another hour. The guitarist taught Michael the riff, breaking it down phrase by phrase. The opening lick, then the turnaround. Michael played it back perfectly, his fingers finding the frets like they'd always been there. Between runs, the session guy checked his intonation on every string. He adjusted 2 more saddles. The B string was 4 cents sharp. The high E was 6 cents flat. He hadn't touched his bridge setup in 6 months. Now he knew better. When he finished, he played a full chord progression. The intervals locked, the overtones aligned. The guitar had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. The assistant engineer walked over during a break. He crouched next to Michael and looked at the acoustic. Can I ask you something? Michael looked up. Sure. When you said it was sharp, did you know it was the intonation? Or did you just know it sounded wrong? Michael thought for a second. I knew it sounded wrong. Then I figured out why. The assistant engineer nodded slowly, like he was doing math in his head. He stood, walked back to the console and made a note in the session log. Intonation check, 12 fret. Caught by MJ. Notice the shift. The session guitarist didn't pack up right away. He sat on the stool, playing the riff over and over, testing the Strat against itself. Every time he hit the 12th fret, he listened a little harder. Not because he doubted the tuner, because a 12-year-old had heard what he didn't. And that changed something. When Michael's father came to pick him up, the session guitarist walked over and shook his hand. "Your kid's got perfect pitch." Joe Jackson nodded like he already knew. The guitarist looked at Michael. "Keep that ear sharp. You're gonna need it." Michael slung the acoustic over his shoulder. "I will." The door closed. The studio settled. The Strat sat on its stand, intonation perfect, waiting for the next session. And somewhere in the back of the control room, a strobe tuner sat on the console, its needle resting at center. A silent witness to the moment a child heard 9 cents and changed the way a professional listened. Wait, here's the moment it mattered. Not in that session, not even that year, but in every session after. Because once the engineers and musicians knew Michael could hear micro differences in pitch, once they understood he wasn't guessing, they stopped assuming. They started checking. The assistant engineer began running intonation tests before every guitar tracking date. The session guitarist started carrying the Allen wrench in his pocket, checking his bridge between takes. The producer started asking Michael's opinion on vocal tuning. "Second voice is flat." They'd check. He'd be right. By the time Michael turned 40, he was co-producing tracks. By 16, he was arranging orchestras. By 18, he was in total control. And it started here in a room where a kid said the octave doesn't sound right, and a professional checked his bridge. The producer kept the session notes in a file marked Motown 74. Years later, after Michael became the biggest star on the planet, a music journalist writing about Motown's golden era asked what he remembered most about working with young Michael Jackson. The producer pulled out that file. He opened it to a page with a single line circled twice. Intonation check, 12 fret, caught by MJ. He didn't talk about the hits. He didn't talk about the fame. He talked about the day a 12-year-old heard 9 cents. "That's when I knew," the producer said. Not that he'd be famous, that he'd be great. The journalist asked what the difference was. "Famous is luck and timing," the producer said. "Great is hearing 9 cents when nobody else in the room can." Because fame is about the audience. Greatness is about the work. And Michael cared about the work. The tape kept rolling. The music kept coming. And every time someone picked up a guitar in a session with Michael Jackson, they checked their intonation first. Because nobody wanted to be the person who didn't.